examples from both countries, but also from a regional perspective, where we are in this debate on larger transition processes towards a green economy, and how a discourse is actually working. Because when we talk about international negotiations, it's much about negotiating texts and negotiating politics and policies, but it is less this kind of open forum of discourse. And I guess if you compare the discourse on sustainable development and green economy with the international negotiations on climate change, I think there is a tendency to carefully look at initiatives that exist at both domestic level, but particularly at the local level, and to gain insight and try to capture this kind of momentum of dynamic and sometimes even more dynamic processes that may fuel, may trigger the debate. And this kind of perspective we would like to take here. We also would like to have a discussion on what kind of mechanisms we would need, and what kind of mechanisms in place are sufficient in order to allow this kind of taking up initiatives from the ground and from a domestic or regional perspective to scale them up. It is part of the negotiation, it is part of the entire discourse on capacity building, on creating platforms of lessons learned, etc. But I think there is much more in the debate, and we can be much more creative in thinking about mechanisms to be in place. And this is why we want to organize the discussions in two parts. One is to concentrate a little bit on policies in place, on discourses, on stakeholder engagement, and particular innovative cases that we want to bring to your attention and discuss with you. And then the second part, to frame this a little bit vis-a-vis more global issues of either energy transition, trade issues, institutional perspectives, and to combine that also with some thinking of how would a process like this then links to the current negotiation, and also what we would suggest or expect from a period after the Rio summit. Doing this, we have the pleasure to welcome a prestigious, interesting group of speakers. I will start to my right with introducing Professor Chie. I think all of you have probably got a leaflet and also some information with full bios there. I just would like to introduce them briefly. He is a professor of environmental policy at Tsinghua University School of Public Policy and Management, and also the director of the Climate Policy Initiative at his university. He is an advisor to both NGOs, academic networks, and but particularly on the green economy and low carbon issues for the Chinese government. We have then to my left Aaron Belinki. He's the international process coordinator at the Brazilian NGO Vita Civilis, and in this position responsible for the Brazilian Green Economy National Dialogue since 2010 on behalf of the Green Economy Coalition. But you have a long track record both in the NGO movement as the former coordinator for the Brazilian Tick Tick Tick, the GCCA campaign in Brazil, but also working on different other aspects like corporate social responsibility. Further to my left, I would like to welcome Professor Adebayo Olokushi. He's director of the UN African Institute of Economic Development and Planning in Dhaka. Much of his research interest is focusing on international relations and economic relations. He has published a lot on these issues. To my right, I welcome Imme Scholz. She is the Deputy Director of the German Development Institute in Bonn, former Program Director for the Environment Program, I think almost a decade long. You've been always in between environment and development issues. You were dealing and are still dealing with climate change issues and climate and adaptation, but also with a much broader research focus on institutional aspects and development policy aspects. We have two co-organizers, hosts, and two institutions that generously provided intellectual but also financial support for our conference. To our right, Harriet Ludwig, she is at the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Bonn, and in the Department of Sustainable Development, among other things, also in charge for green economy issues. And to my left, I welcome Stefan Konzius from the Federal Ministry for the Environment in Berlin. He is, among other things, in charge for dealing with economies in transition, sustainable development, and the chief coordinator for the Rio +10 preparations of the German government. And I would like to hand over to you for an introduction, some welcome remarks.
Thank you so much. It's a common effort by two ministries. We are trying to team up from two sides, development cooperation and environment ministry of Germany, as we're heading for a conference which is on both issues. And we are very much hoping that the debate today will somehow give an input to the negotiations we have here, or at least be a break from difficult negotiations. We think that this exchange here, listening to the insight of this prestigious group of people working on environment and development in different countries, and giving us an insight in their view of the perspectives in these countries, in their regions, as well as what we can expect maybe in the future, not only in this conference we all are preparing, but in the future how we accelerate the capacity development needed for a real transition to low carbon and green economies, how to make sure that social, environmental and economic aspects are really taken on board. We believe that the acceleration of change in this direction is not a difficult exercise. Also the negotiations on proposals trying to help with the transition to become reality is not so difficult. We rather believe that Rio can be a start of such an effort, and this will not be doable, this will not be sustainable, this will not be with real results in the field if we are not doing this together and overcome this what certain people tend to call the implementation gap. Many developing countries have established and fostered good cooperation relations with a broad range of donors, including through partnerships with companies. These cooperation activities cover many fields, fortunately successfully. However, there are gaps remaining, in particular in the field of sustainable development, including green inclusive economy, and we think that it's the countries themselves, the societies in these countries who should define the priorities on this very broad issue. As green economy is not replacing sustainable development as a concept, but is a tool to make this sustainable development effort a reality. And we very much hope that this is a stakeholder-driven process, and that's why we propose to have the conference here today. Thank you very much for coming, and I hand over to Professor Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you so much. The way, as I said, we want to always